one of the reasons why this class has the reputation it has is because it ought to. There. It ought to have the reputation. What reputation does it have?
You have to work really hard.
You have to work really hard. What did I just say? Why does it have this reputation? It ought to, right. Okay, what other elements of this reputation have you picked up?
Toughest course in the curriculum.
Toughest course in the curriculum. You know, I'm always glad that some course can be identified as the toughest. You know, you have a real flabby curriculum if nothing can be identified as the toughest course. Is that right? So it might as well be this one. See what I mean? It all works together. All right, what else have you heard? What else have you heard? Seriously.
About you or the course?
I don't know. All right, you mentioned, what have you heard about me? Now, by the way, just listen closely because it's not true. Go ahead.
That in other courses you were nice, but here you become a bear.
I'm a nice bear. But yeah, Bob, we're saving this for you. Right here. Now, he's the other half of the truth squad, by the way. Yeah, I would not want to go to my grave thinking that I had created that kind of an image. That of a bear. So I hope that some of you will be able to get over that.
You prefer Wolverine?
Pardon me?
You prefer Wolverine?
Yeah, something that's equally nasty. No, seriously, I'm willing to accept that because, and let me be a little bit serious about this. Sometimes we need to be pushed. And what I try to do in here is to find ways to push as constructively as possible. And sometimes when I'm pushing constructively, I look an awful lot like a bear. And I sound an awful lot like some other kind of an unpleasant creature. But you know, we've really got a problem ahead of us, and that is we have to develop a lot of understandings and competencies which are not necessarily easy to develop. But the biggest problem is we've got to overcome a bunch of stuff that tends to be very pervasive and very common. We've got to overcome, for example, the presumption that mathematics is just impossible because God never intended me to have any skill in mathematics. How many of you would say that's true? That's true. God never intended me to have any skill in mathematics. Let me see your hands. Come on, be honest, be honest, be honest. Do I have any like that? Oh, we got no problem. We got no problem. Okay. Now, the reason why that's a problem, in case some of you are secret haters of mathematics, is that mathematics is not something that is generally required for the kinds of curriculum that people go through when they go into ministries and when they go into Christian education alike. This is not very typical. I know that. I know that. It doesn't follow that all good people are experts in mathematics. But that one is the easiest one to deal with in this course. This course, for heaven's sakes, is not about mathematics. So it's not an issue. You're thinking of statistics. That is about mathematics. Yeah, you do have to take that, but you've been anxious for the wrong course, if that's been your anxiety, because that's the course you really need to be anxious about. But as a matter of fact, this course can be approached with something else that is probably as rare as mathematics skill, but we don't seem to have rarity of that anymore. And that is logic, reasoning, the capacity to make intelligent sense out of ideas. And that can be pretty rare. How many of you really know that you are not a logical reasoner? Can I see your hands? I want to count you. You're not a logical reasoner. Let me see your hands. You're illogical, unreasonable. No? Hey, we got no problem. We got no problem. We got no math phobia. We got no illogic. We're in great shape. See, I don't have to be a bear if I can get a certain amount of that going, all right? Now then, let me ask you another one. How many of you are pretty good at making sense out of relatively incomplete shreds of ideas So long as they're at least coherent and systematic, you can make sense out of it, even though it's not elaborately precise and clear. How many of you can do that? You have that skill? We got a problem. Ask that again. How many of you are good at making sense out of things that are at least consistent, even if they're not elaborately thorough and complete? You can make sense out of it. You know you can. Let me see your hands. The rest of you are in deep trouble. There's where we may have a difficulty. And it's at that point where I turn into a bear. Because I have discovered that sometimes people who are not being reasonable, not thinking, not making sense out of pieces of idea, are doing so because they are just deliberately stubborn. Because it's an attribute, a characteristic that the good Lord has given out rather liberally. And when people behave as if they don't have that, it makes me angry. And, you know, when any of us get angry, that's not good. And I really don't like to get angry. I try real hard not to get angry, and I do a lot of other things first. But every now and then, I'll get a person in this class who just seems to have everything spelled out and can't connect ideas, or won't connect ideas. And if I haven't said it, the person doesn't know it. And he waits for me to say it so that he can say it back to me. And that makes me angry. Because I would like to see every one of you manifest something that the good Lord gave you. And that is the capacity to think and reason. But the point here is that we have to presume that at no time will all of us have every piece of information instantly available that we might need and want. But you've got to work at it the best you can. So I want to hear you do whatever you can do with the best understanding you have of ideas, and I want you to be free and open as you share where you are in thinking, so that we can hear it, relate to it, and if necessary, restructure so that we can get a clearer understanding. What am I driving at?
Come through a logical reasoning process so that we go from one step to another, I think, and build the blocks to where we're going to learn how to do this.
Did I say that? Did I say that?
In other words?
Huh?
You said it in other words?
I said it in other words, and in fact, I was throwing down bits and pieces, and she was stacking it up and making sense out of it. That's what I'm driving at. That's what I'm driving at. One of the most important things to understand is that I work interactively, and I treat this as a seminar. You've made preparations, you've done reading, you've been informed what the task is here. I'm not going to teach you the book. I'm not going to start over and say, here's what it means. I'm going to let you take the bits and pieces that you've gleaned as you prepare and add them to the things that are going to happen in here as we talk and as we illustrate, as I do things and as colleagues in here do things. And you will build bigger and bigger ideas, and then you will be in a position to check these out with me, with each other, and with the tasks that are coming down, and you will come away with a larger understanding. Many people tell stories about this course, which in fact delight me, because nothing that's been said so far is truly wrong. But there are several other things that haven't been said that often are said to the positive side of things. Have you heard anything positive about this course?
Yes.
What have you heard?
That it has been extremely helpful toward the dissertation writing.
Extremely helpful toward dissertation planning and writing. Okay. Add a phrase there. What else have you heard that's on the positive side?
That if you really work at this, you can actually have the second chapter for your dissertation almost ready.
That's 941.
But with a combination there.
That's 941. Yeah, but in this course, the same kind of thing can be said, if I can modify that just a little bit, Enrique. Most people who tell that story about this course will say, when you get through this course, you'll know what to do in dissertation writing. Mm-hmm. And that's really one of our most practical goals. We do not have a big enough faculty here
to do what many doctoral level graduate institutions do. And that is to just literally hand feed one student after another when they get to dissertation. It is a very common thing in some graduate schools for a graduate student, a doctoral student, to come to the mentor and say, let me show you my work. And I look at the work and it's, you know, another page. Is that all you've done? Yeah, that's all I've done. It's very, very difficult. And I say, well, okay, fine, you know, try adding this. You know. The person goes away, and next day he's back. And we do a little bit more. And next day he's back. And then, and more, and more. And what happens is that the faculty literally gets worn out pulling persons along, hand feeding them information and ideas. That is not a good doctoral education experience, though it is common. It is not. We have a relatively small faculty, and we couldn't even operate around here if we tried to operate that way. We just do not have enough faculty. So what do? We are very careful to make sure, number one, that we don't bring people into this doctoral program who don't have rudimentary competencies that are going to see them through. And one of them we're looking for in doctoral students that we let in here is that they have shown evidence through their own work in the field, through their professional skills and so forth. They have a capacity to stand on their own feet and in fact to think for themselves. They don't have to be fed piece by piece by piece. We look for that. Now, if we made a mistake in your case and let you in where that's not true, don't talk about it, because that would be hard for some of us on the faculty screening committees to accept, because we would lose face. So don't make us lose face. Just pretend. The other thing we do is to make sure in the research training courses that people are learning the processes well enough to stand on their own feet. And they're learning how to use the resource materials well enough that they can avoid going day by day to the faculty mentor and say, what do I do next? One of the reasons that we have to do it that way is because of our small faculty. Another reason we have to do it that way is because we're concerned about developing self-standing professionals who will make a difference in leadership in the field. And if we train them to be dependent, we're not going to achieve that. We're concerned about educating people in an independent mode so that they can function competently on their own and can bring others along in the process. And we go straight for that as an objective, even in a single course like this one, which is the rudimentary or the basic research training course, 921. Here's where you grasp the general concepts of social science, and we apply it specifically to 3 different modes of applied social science that are the common 3 modes that you will find as you look through all the literature and as you find yourself in tasks ahead in your career, being called upon to deliver skill and understanding. It delights me when a student will get on the email from Brazil and say, I ran up against this, but I made this kind of a change here in my dissertation plan. I assume that's okay. I'm delighted. Because what's happened there is that the person realizes that some of the things you build into a plan for any research will run into problems. Something happens and you can't quite fulfill that. You plan for a sampling technique that doesn't quite work. You had to modify it. Now, if you are trained badly, what will happen if you're out in Brazil doing field work and something doesn't work? If you're not trained well, what do?
You panic.
Either panic, period, or you'll panic plus. Now, when you panic plus, what's involved? Stopping and getting on the telephone and finding sooner or later how to get through to somebody back in North America and say, now what do I do? I can't do it this way, so what do I do? And then, you know, good grief, I don't remember how your design looks. Let's go find it, call me back tomorrow and I'll see what you got. And, you know, that's dumb. And whenever that happens, we know that we have bad research training. But what I like, as I said before, somebody gets an email and says, therefore I did this. And as I look at what the this was that the person has changed to, I say, well, of course. I couldn't have done any better myself. I mean, it's fine. The person didn't even ask me, is that what I should do? Simply says, that's okay, isn't it? As a kind of an afterthought after the rest of the communication. Simply saying, you ought to know that this is the direction we're going now, we changed this. So I like that. I like that. And I'm not satisfied until I get the 921 students capable of doing that. And, you know, from where you are today, that may be a little bit of a leap. A little bit of a leap. And that's fine. Tell me anything else you might have heard about this course that's good. One particular one that I really am eager to hear, and I wonder if it's getting out in the grapevine. One good thing about this class.
Somebody mentioned you pointing us to the stars.
Exactly what does that mean?
I was
You're not
hoping
sure.
to discover.
Ah. What do you think it might mean?
You uphold the promise and the hope of the excellence of research.
You betcha. And I also have a great deal of confidence in you. That's one of the things that I really believe that most students catch on to very, very promptly around here. You know, at least the first half it may be difficult in 921. But in the second half you'll begin to see it. I've taught this course in any one of its many variations. I've never taught it twice exactly the same. But I have taught this course for 38 years, which is as old as many of you are. I designed the course first at Michigan State University, and it, in its current variations is still going there. I don't have any idea how many students I've dealt with in this course, but the classes are usually this size, twice a year. You figure it out. Twice a year, let's say more or less 20 people, 40 a year, times 38 years. How many people? Would you believe over 1,000? I know, because it's been traumatic and difficult, I know how many people have failed. I could virtually call you their names, because there are 7 of them who have failed this course. Would you say that's good odds or bad odds? In your own previous education, would you say you've been in many classes where you could predict from the beginning odds like that for yourself? That you're up against odds like that? That's another piece of the good news about this course that I hope gets out. Now, that's because the sorts of people that I deal with, Michigan State, thank the good Lord, and it here at Trinity, have been almost to a case, highly motivated, hardworking, and eager to learn. How many of you are highly motivated? Can I see your hands? Highly motivated. You're not highly motivated? Oh, you've been up and back down again. He's not only highly motivated, he's way ahead of us. Hardworking. Hardworking. And what was the third one?
Eager to learn.
Eager to learn. We're in business. We're in business. I will commit myself to you if you commit yourself to me. Is that fair enough? You work like crazy, do your share, and you'll make it. And I'll feel good, and you'll feel good, and we will leave here very happy at the end of this course. Now, why do we divide the course into 3 pieces? We've got, what is it, 4 days this week? And then 2 days the following week? 3, and then 3 the final week. Why do we break it like that? Did anybody spot the pattern?
Allow time for writing.
Exactly. Allowing the time so that after the intensive days together this week, you have a first writing task to go boom right away on, and have it ready by the time you come back to that next time together after that break. Now that, when you come back together after that break, you bring your paper in your hand. And what I don't want to hear is, I haven't typed it yet, but it's ready. I've heard that one. I don't want to hear it again. I've heard the one about the dog ate it. I've heard the one about my breakfast cereal spilled on it. I've heard the one about I think my wife put it in her purse because it's not in my briefcase. I've heard all those. I've heard the one about the kid cried all night last night. I've heard them all. None of them will be adequate. Now that's a little bit crisp and harsh. And if you had only one overnight, it might be different. How long do you have to do that? From today till when? Today's Tuesday until Monday of next week, right? So when do I start on that first paper? I would start on it right away. How many more assignments are you going to have this week that you'll have to do on top of that? And the answer is only one or two very small ones, little exercises. And those will come up. But they really won't get in the way. You can get started on that paper. Sustain time on that paper after you really get all the understandings that you're going to get. I mean, this is all it's going to be, folks. Let's go, let's get it written. When will that day be? What day is that? That's all you're going to hear about this descriptive proposal. You might as well write it. You're not going to get any more. Friday evening. You've had it. Or Friday morning, actually, because we're going to meet Friday in the morning, I think. Is that right or not? We were talking about that. Well, at any rate, Friday. Now, what do we do when you get back together again on that next week? What is that day? Tuesday? Wednesday? Whatever it is. Is it Monday? Whenever we get together, what do we do that time? Do we go back over and review the proposal? You have your schedule, you can look at it. Monday. See, Monday, October 12, 5th session says descriptive proposals due. Now that's up at the very front end of that course, right? And immediately after that it says experimental models. In other words, boom, we're off on the new topic, the new task, which is the experimental design. Right? Now I will do one thing, and that is that I will do a final, as you hand in that paper, 15, 20 minutes of what has come up that you really would like to have some kind of response to that will help you solve a problem that you know is in your paper and you didn't get satisfaction on it. I will do about 15, 20 minutes. But not enough to give you a chance to, relearn the whole thing and then go rewrite the paper. No way. That paper comes in. Now, when does the next paper come in? Now, how long do you have to do that? It's a week, isn't it? Wednesday to Wednesday. Now, that's a harder proposal. That's a harder proposal. Now then, when is the other paper due in? There are only 3 major papers. November 2, right? That's the one you do after the course is over, because we will have finished your background for that evaluative proposal as our last session together. And then you carry that away, work on it, and as promptly as feasible, get that paper done and get it turned in by November 2. Now, when would you write that paper if you're smart? You'd write it as promptly as you possibly could, the same way you've done these others. Just as soon as we get the grounding so that you can do it, do it. You say, well, why does it say November 2? Because for one reason or another, when courses are over, you find yourself having to pick up and get going with other things you've been putting off, and other things for some people will get in the way. So realistically, I'll give you till November 2 to get it in. But the smart people will get it done very promptly. Now, what's the logic? You tell me now. You've heard some bits and pieces. Make some sense of it. Why do we push getting those papers written promptly, getting them in, getting them written and read and back to you? Why do we do that? What's the reasoning?
Maybe the broad vision to compare, see the big picture and put together, compare each one.
That's the ground, that's the background for it. But what is the practical reason for doing it this way?
See how we're doing.
That's more of the a background of these are not wrong answers. It's
Okay.
You
just
have
keep
fresh
going.
information,
Pardon?
right? You have fresh information from the day.
And you're going to be able to use it in the future better if you use it promptly. That has been established over and over and over again. When you're dealing with skills, if you're going to apply those skills promptly, they will stick with you longer. Furthermore, you will retain more of the recently read, recently heard, recently grasped bits and pieces because it'll come together in the exercise. Now, the exercise that you'll be doing is a small-scale proposal for a piece of research. And here you are taking a whole course to learn how to design research. And what do? To tell you right from the day one, you start writing a proposal. We haven't had any background yet. We haven't had any skill yet. Is that fair? Is that fair? To expect you to do that?
You build skills piece by piece, and the more that you start with the small pieces, the better it builds to a complete whole.
And you might as well start, because those pieces have got to be applied and used so that you can increment them. Now, the nature of the task, however, is not regurgitating or feeding back or responding to a list of questions about information. What is the task? What is the learning task itself?
To learn how to develop the research proposal.
But how do we do that? What is the task by which we do that? What is the learning task?
By doing it, by writing.
By putting one together, and that itself is a kind of holistic exercise. It's not just looking at this piece or that piece or the other, it's putting it all together. Because that's the real world where these skills will be applied. Nobody is ever going to ever again give you a test on research skills. You're doctoral students, for heaven's sakes. People aren't going to give you tests on much of anything. Instead, people are going to what?
Ask you.
They're going to ask you to do it. That's called being employed. And the task is not, oh, I can tell you everything you want to know about it. What do you want to ask me? It's not the way the real professional world works. The issue is not how do you answer that, but how do you do it? And by the way, I don't really care. I'm your boss. I want you to do it. That's why we hired you. Do you have any idea how many of you in missions and in education are apt to be asked to get involved in designing research studies? You say, oh man, that's not me. I'm a teacher. How many of you would say that? That's not me. I'm a teacher. Let me see your hands. Come on. Be honest. Some of you people have real sluggish hands. Generally speaking, that is a common image that many of us have. Now, maybe the hands didn't go up because you're sophisticated enough to realize that once you get a doctorate, people are going to make some assumptions about you. And that is that you've had some specialized training, and if anybody around here can help us design a research study that we need, it's apt to be you rather than somebody else who doesn't have a doctorate. It's a little bit like this. Do you have any idea what are the odds on spending a significant part of your career as an administrator? How many of you aspire to be an administrator? You really would like to be a dean or a chairman or a director or a president or executive director of an organization. Let me see. How many are aspiring to leadership like that? Let me see. Come on, come on, come on. 1, 2. Nothing immoral about this. Just 2. All right? How many of you are apt to be doing it at some point in your career anyway? Let me see the rest of those things. And you are pretty close to right. It will be in the order of about 65 to 70% of you will spend some particularly important part of your career as an administrator. Once you have a doctorate degree in either education or missions, you will end up as an administrator for part of your life. Unless you are really good at fighting off the tigers. And similarly, how many of you expect to spend part of your life doing research? Can I see your hands? And that's an underestimated number. It'll be very close to 80% of it. You owe it to yourself to be ready, to be on the road, to have those skills exercised enough that you can count on. What am I suggesting? I'm suggesting that the urgency of coming at this seriously is something that you owe to yourself. It's not just a question of prestige or pride for our program. And as your teacher in this particular skill, I add one little thing to it, and that is that I really can't stand it. I can't stand it when you don't succeed. I am very dedicated to seeing you, each one, succeed. You meet me halfway and you will. Okay? Now, all the rest of the stories you hear about this course, shrug and say, yeah, all that's true. But the big plus is, that guy Ward is on my side. And he has promised to see me through it. And I will. Fair enough? Let's pray. Let's give a time for praying for yourself, for me, for each other, for the environment, for learning, for dedicating ourselves to hard work and care and thoroughness. All these things are fitting to ask our Lord for. And in the power of His Holy Spirit, He's prepared to meet us. Let's pray together. As you will, individually. Father, teach us the skills of being responsible inquirers. We accept you as the great revealer. We accept you as the source of truth. And even as we are created in your image and likeness, Father, we would reciprocate your role as the revealer of truth, to be those who mirror that by being the seekers after truth. Help us, Father, to learn the disciplines and skills that make us responsible inquirers into the things that you have made. We ask you, Father, to outfit our very consciousness, our motivations, our lifestyle, and especially our intellectual processes, so that these may be disciplined to see truth and to inquire after those things that you have made. And Father, even as Bob has prayed, I would also ask that you make us responsible to one another, that we can be truly sharers in that quest of inquiry. Help us to be honest and straightforward with one another. Help us not to be shy and private. Help us to be open and overt. Help us not to be afraid of those things which we have no need to fear. Help us, Father, to be aware that we are in this together and that we can learn more as we learn with and from each other. And may the Lord Jesus Christ be praised in all things. Amen. Science. What is science?
The disciplined investigation of God's creation.
The disciplined investigation of God's creation. Do you buy that? Is that a strong, weak, or awful definition?
It's a bit weak only on the methodology, that there's a method. There's definitely a method to this investigation.
Well, let me advocate for him a minute. He said disciplined.
That's right, I
What did you mean by disciplined?
exactly what Bob's alluding to, that there's a methodology involved.
Then I can,
You'd accept that?
I would withdraw my.
By the way, that is one of the finest uses of the word discipline that you can come up with. There is an orderly procedure that is faithful to the characteristics of the thing being studied. How many of you have ever really closely examined a rainbow? Most of us at least as children, have noticed how the colors are stacked, which ones are next to each other, and where the thing goes, right? Does it help when you use a magnifying glass? Not particularly. You stand there with a magnifying glass, nothing good happens to the rainbow. That is not a disciplined inquiry. It's a wrong tool. Wrong tool. Wrong tools, incorrectly used tools, the inquiry becomes, extend your language, undisciplined. So the methodological concern that Bob is expressing is indeed one that's very important, and you have to be able to get that into your concept of science. It is not just the, ooh, isn't it great? Look at all this wonderful stuff. It's interesting to reflect on the nature of the first instructed task given by God to anyone. Any human being. What was the first instructed task? Do this. What was it? Huh? No, it's more specific than that. Name those critters. Name the animals. Now, that is exactly where science begins. You've got to name the phenomenon. Why do you have to name the phenomenon? Again, it comes back to this discipline issue. Why do you have to name the animals? Here's Adam and Eve, and they got these characters running all over the place, and the elephants are stopping the radishes. So Adam gets up in the morning, takes a look out the kitchen window, and says, guess what? One of those big guys with the great big round feet is stomping the radishes. And you know, she says, which big guy with which big feet? We got a lot of them that are pretty big around here. What are you talking about? He says, well, you know, one of those. And she says, I got to see it to know what you're talking about. Not a very satisfactory way to live, right? Now, after a little while, and they follow through in God's first instruction, he gets up in the morning, he looks out there, and sure enough, there go the radishes right down in the mud. This time he says to her, we got an elephant in the garden again. See the difference in communication? We've got some discipline around this because we've got a vocabulary for it. Now, some of our tasks this week are to get the vocabulary so we don't generalize about those big ones with the big round feet. We're going to have some vocabulary. That's one reason you've been reading. That's one reason I've asked you to mark words. We've got to use a vocabulary in order to be disciplined inquirers. Does that make sense? There is absolutely no glory points in heaven or anywhere else for having memorized the most technical terms. No glory points. It's a functional task. You'll be able to communicate better. You'll be able to input and output ideas more precisely. Does that make sense? That's what science is all about. Science. Great definition. Good start. Good concern. Nicely rebutted. Social science. Social science. Now what? I can see it in your face. Going up and down. All right, come on. Somebody else grab that. Social science. Where do you go with that? What's the idea? What's the meaning? How does it relate to the word science? What do you do with that?
You could extend the previous definition of a disciplined investigation of God's creation to say a disciplined investigation of how His best creation acts individually and in a group.
Okay. His best creation. What's the chapter and verse for that one?
Came at the climax of the Creation Week, I usually think of the most thinking being the one who was given dominion over the rest of creation.
Okay? In fact, God said something on that occasion, didn't he?
Mhm.
Very good, very good. So I think your qualification is very scripturally supportable. Okay, now, the disciplined inquiry idea is still with us. That's what science is all about. The qualifier social, if you were to replace that with one word that would also be just as explicit, what one word could you use?
Human.
Society is so close to social that it's obviously a correct answer. But human is probably a more powerful answer. If historically the fields of science had emerged in such a way that we called it human science, we don't call it human science. Why not? Historical choice made many years ago, and somewhere in the early 19th century, it began to be called social science. Social having to do with the related human creation. The reason why it's not as explicit as it could be, because social also can refer to a lot of animal characteristics. So social science could be done of gorillas, and is. So it's not quite as narrow as we really mean it. We usually mean it in reference to human creation. Just as an illustration of this, the Moody Institute of Science Films. How many of you are familiar with the fact that Moody Bible Institute has a filmmaking contractor in Van Nuys, California, or some such place, somewhere in California? It's called Moody Institute of, would you believe, Science? In the first place, it's not a science institute, it's a filmmaking organization. And they've been making films since the 40s. I think the first film was released in 47, just after, a couple years after the war was over. And it was an extremely elegant movie, done as very few were done in that time in color. And some of you have seen it. Moody's first film, still floating around, still seen 50 some odd years later, 51 years later. You know the name of it?
War of the Bees.
No, that was the second. No, that was not the second. It was down the road away. But it was the God of creation. The God of creation. The God of creation was a very colorful picture of, isn't God great? Because look what he's done. And it was basically a film shot about 2/3 through telescopes and 1/3 through microscopes. So what in that film you see is, good grief, look at the galaxies, look at space. God made all of that. Fantastic. Got it? Yeah, let's go the other way. Turn the lenses around and go down this way, and what do you see? Ooh, look at all that microscopic world. God is great. Ironically, it's like standing in the human posture and looking out or looking down, but never in that film looking in a mirror. There's something there that's telling us a lot more than we'd like to admit sometimes. Christians historically have been a lot more comfortable examining creation when they're not looking at the sixth day, but when they're looking at the first several days. There is an avoidance in conservative Christianity, an avoidance of a close look at the social. Now, you mentioned another Moody Institute of Science film. I think it was about 6 years down the road, they brought out another one. And as a kid, I remember I saw the first one when I was, I think, a senior year in high school, 47, so long ago. And I thought, gee, that is really spectacular. It's wonderful to think about God in those terms. But then I began asking myself, because I was a kind of a funny kid, and I kept doing things like this, how come it is that Christians are always big on looking at the stars or looking in a microscope, but they don't seem to be all that interested in understanding people? So 6, 7 years later, they brought out a film called
He was like,
That was yours, yeah, excuse me.
What are the bees or something like that?
Yeah, what was the what was the actual name of that thing?
Message from the bees or something.
No, it was something that had society or kingdom or city, the City of the Bees. City of the Bees. And it literally was a macro photography of a bee hive. Okay? And by the time you got through that whole film, you really knew a lot more about bees than you ever thought you could need to know. And what you got was a picture of a highly structured, highly regulated, authoritarian society that got along very well because everybody stayed in his place.
Are you all right?
And that film never really critiqued that kind of society. Instead, it suggested that God is particularly honored by that kind of society. And I thought, you know, we're in real trouble if the best Moody Institute of Science can do is to show us, finally, a film on society and simply show us a bunch of bees that stay in their place. This is never going to do anything for black-white relations. And that's the way it was. Now, why is the Christian community so much more comfortable doing that kind of thing than they are examining human beings? I think there's an answer to this, and you've probably thought about it, but I want to be honest about it, straightforward, and out front, because it'll help us this week as we learn our subject.
And sin distorts creation.
But do you know what Christians tend to believe about that, more than they believe that generalization? And you can see it in terms of how Christians talk about nature, how Christians talk about human society, and how Christians tend to avoid literature about human society. Sin is generally understood to affect the creation, but what part of the creation does it affect the most? You got it? Incorrectly, there is an association of sin with humanity. So if I'm looking at the bees, I'm looking at pure nature, untouched by sin. If I'm looking at the stars, I'm looking at pure nature, untouched by sin. If I'm looking at the animal realm, the plant realm, and so forth, but the minute I look at human beings, then what am I looking at?
Corruption of God's plan.
The corruption of God's plan. And we're uneasy about it. You know, I've had people tell me, but you can't really make any generalizations from social science because you just can't extrapolate ideas because of sin. So wait a minute. I can extrapolate about horses, but I can't extrapolate about people because of sin? At some point, I'm going to have to say, hey, gang, got really bad news for you. And then I lower on them one particular proof text. What is it?
All creation is suffering the effects of sin.
The whole creation, to use the old language, doth travail in sin. The whole creation, in the scripture it says, the whole creation is in fact touched by the negative consequences of sin. So don't leave the horses out. Don't presume that it's going to be a perfect world when we're looking at bees. Don't presume that it's going to be only an imperfect world when you look at human beings. You're going to learn a lot when you look at human beings. In fact, you're going to learn a lot about some of the very things that if you don't understand, you're going to screw up in ministry. You follow me? How are you going to come to some kind of an understanding of what people are like? You're not going to get that out of the City of the Bees. You're not going to get that out of a bird book. You're going to have to look at, go back to our vocabulary here. You're going to have to look at
Social science. Social science is our friend, social science is our enemy. Choose A or B and explain your choice. Take it, somebody.
Can we choose both?
Huh?
Can we choose both?
Explain it.
Yes, it's our enemy if we're going to use it for wrong purposes, to attack, for example, and destroy another group of people.
Or even get Christian leverage over them.
Right,
You do understand Christian leverage, don't you? That's sanctified arm twisting. Okay.
And yes, if we're gonna approach a problem that needs to be addressed, and our research will bring some solutions or possibilities to resolving that situation.
Good. Now, just if I could pause a minute and talk about what he just did before we talk about the substance of his response. What he just did with my question was to, in effect, say, you asked a question that can't be answered the way you asked it. Did you hear him say that? I said, is it this or is it this? And he says, it's both. Now, if you have been around me very much, and a few people in here have been, you know that that is absolutely legitimate. And he just used the harsher form of it, but he muttered here so that he's trying to irritate me. What did you just say?
It was a bad question.
It's a bad question. What? And it was intentionally. I'm strategic, buddy. I do a lot of things simply by accident. Just the worst of them. No, I intended to do that because I wanted to see who would pick up on that. The very fact that you can pose a yes or no question or a this or that question doesn't mean that truth is a this or that. And that was a good example of it. And you are totally free in this class at any point to say that's a bad question. And for those of you from Asian societies where that's too impolite, you can say it any way you want to, or you get him to say it for you. Yeah, the point here is we've got to learn to catch that kind of question and knock it, because sometimes truth is on both sides. My point, however, is that it doesn't follow that the things we learn about human beings are, we need to learn about human beings as person and as society. And if we are concentrating on trying to learn and understand human beings, then we need the skills of social science. So what we're doing in this class then is getting ready for dissertation. The purpose of this class is to get ready to write a dissertation. True or false? Some say true, some say false. And what is the problem? Bad question. Bad question. What is a much better way to think about that than that is our purpose? What is the purpose of this class? You tell me now. That's where we are, in case you've lost track on your notes. Purpose of this class. Science, social science, purpose of this class. You can make notes that way. Where are we? Purpose of this class.
To do research.
To do research. I think that's a step ahead of ourselves, but it's on the right track.
To help us develop skills to be able to do good research.
To develop the skills to enable us to do research for, keep going, for the purpose, keep going,
Understanding human beings?
for the purpose of better understanding human beings. Thank you. Now, Lily, to you, what is understanding human beings?
Knowing how they act, how they react in different kind of environments, different kind of conditions.
Why do you need to know that? Why?
Because if we want to help them, if we want, in the church context, if we want to minister to them, then we need to know we understand how they function.
We're making an assumption here, but it's a responsible assumption. You have to ask, what are the prices you pay for it? That is, if you want to relate effectively, you need as much background that allows you to anticipate, to feel with others. Otherwise, you have unrealistic expectations of people. What else could go wrong if you don't really understand people? Unrealistic expectations, what else?
Conflicts.
Pardon?
Conflicts.
Unintended conflicts.
Or you can misjudge them.
Misjudgments? Good. Misjudgments. How does that misjudgment process work? It works about the same way in every culture, every part of the world. How does misjudgment work?
You'll start saying things about the person that is acting or doing this and that, but without knowing why he's acting in such a way.
And when we're not sure what the motive of the behavior of the other is, what are we inclined to do? The minute I say, I don't know why he's doing that, what is apt to follow after that line? Something negative, something pejorative, something suspicious, something not flattering. I don't know why he's doing that, but it sure gets on my nerves. You ever hear that? I used to have a boss one time who had a physical ailment, and he had a kind of nervous tic, and every now and then he was just sitting there in a meeting or something. And once you understood that behavior was totally out of his control, it was simply a process of an ailment that he could not control, it was much easier to ignore it and to look past it. But until you had that grasp, that understanding of how that mechanism worked, it would disrupt the meeting, it would disrupt anybody speaking, it would just stop dead, big eyes, and what do I do next? But he would just, just suddenly jump or lurch and do this kind of thing. As we understand how human behavior processes work, we're in a much better position to be able to relate to people, even people who are different from ourselves. Because we see the commonalities and we see the differences. And we understand what may lie behind them. Okay? In doing science, then, what must we do? If we're studying human beings, what must we be able to do? What is necessary for good social science? If you're lost on your notes, that is, what is needed for good social science? Pardon? A concern for validity. Now, all of a sudden, he has jumped to technical language. It's very interesting. All right, let's play with that. What is the concern for validity?
True.
Validity is one way to talk about truth. Something is valid, it's alleged to be true. Why in the literature of social science do you find emphasis on validity? Now at this point, he's probably saying, I think I just said that. Somebody else pick it up and expand on the idea. He's got us off on a good trail here. Let's stay with it. What's the concern for validity?
Social science, well, social science is softer than other kinds of science, so you have to make sure of the validity to ground your thinking.
You're making an assertion there that I would like to put on the table for some discussion later, and that is whether the so-called softer sciences, social sciences are generally called the softer sciences, are inherently more vulnerable to invalidity. Let me explain gravity.